if you want to share, this is a good time to do it since your face and hands are free for a moment.
Live on Twitter.
Live on Twitter, that's good.
Not seen anything on LinkedIn yet.
Okay.
I just got a LinkedIn notification.
Hmm. Okay, I got a Facebook notification.
See, when Frank's not here, we just have to guess about Facebook unless one of us looks.
No, I got a Facebook notification. It says it's live.
Okay, excellent. Did I? No. Oh, yes, I just did. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we're streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And we're all live, and that's a good thing. All right, I'm gonna get ready here to start the show. I'm gonna clock my time here at 11:07. All right. All right. Mute is off. You know what? Should I pull that curtain a little bit? See if it looks a little too bright in the background.
For those who are already watching the stream, this is the live recording being pre-set up prior to us actually talking to you.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
There's another audience who's watching commercials right now, but this is
Okay,
what
let's quiet, please.
Mute is off, and we're gonna go in 3, 2, 1, and
Hi, Steve Gillmor here. This is the Gillmor Gang. Our erstwhile companion, Frank Radis, is not on the show today. He's in SCAD, the
okay.
Savannah. What is that? Who is doing that?
Got noise there.
It's Keith who's doing that. Okay, let's do another start, please.
Okay, let's start one more time. Okay.
Sorry about that. I was checking Facebook and it went loud.
Yeah, it does that. All right. And by the way, mute your phones, people. All right. Mute is off, and we're gonna go in 3, 2, 1, and
Hi, Steve Gillmor here. This is the Gillmor Gang. Joining us, not from Savannah, what state is that? Georgia, is Frank Radis. He'll be here not next week either, but the following week. And joining us from the state of Atlanta, Georgia, is Brent Leary. Welcome, Brent.
Yes, but I'm also not at SCAD, so
Oh yeah, that's 2 for 2.
there it is.
can we get a hat view there, Brent? Thank you. Ooh, nice.
And who is that? What does that say?
It's the
What does it say?
Steve?
Do you
I
really
have a
need to?
suspicion of what it says.
it's the letter L and the letter A.
It's always a Rams hat.
Or a Rams, logo.
Yeah.
No.
So the Rams are in LA still?
Yes, they are.
Well, it's more like again than still, isn't it?
Yeah,
Can
we.
you stop mucking with your video, please?
Mucking.
That's better. Okay, from the state of Palo Alto is Keith Tier.
Great pleasure to be with you all today. Now that I'm back in California from my London trip, and I think the lower third has had its time.
From the framework or compact of Massachusetts is Dennis Pombriant. Welcome, Dennis.
Hi, Steve. I'm a very happy camper today. As we speak, Steve Bannon's been sentenced. Donald Trump has been subpoenaed. Liz Truss, Keith, I don't know what you said to Liz Truss last week when you were over there, but
It worked.
Bye, Liz. See ya.
is it true you were just over there shopping for lettuce?
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, that's the question. Is the prime minister, do we call it Mr. Head or Sir Lettuce? I'm just curious.
Well, it's kind of
I'd say-
interesting that the Germans not too long ago had a leader named Kohl, Helmut Kohl. And I think Kohl is what cabbage?
Ah,
Yeah, but his first name is Helmet.
Cabbage
Helmet
head.
Head. Helmet Head. I like that. That's
There was speculation on the Twitter about whether the lettuce voted Leaf or Romaine.
oh my God.
Ah,
Okay, the guy who last spoke from the state of Washington, not the city, is Michael Markman.
How do you do? I'm here in we went through a week of having the least healthy air in the world, and we had some winds and rains that cleaned it up somewhat. But so I'm breathing again.
What
So
did China?
Herschel Walker can explain that, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, did China send their bad air over to you guys?
We sent the bad air to China, I think.
oh, I thought you were just smoking some of that salmon.
Oh,
Wow.
Unfortunately, our bad air came from Eastern Washington, where there are a lot of wildfires going on. Didn't come from China at all.
All right. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we could talk about Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, all
Okay.
kinds of things.
Get started.
I've said everything I need to say.
That would be the problem.
That is the problem. I mean,
Yeah. So now what?
I don't know. Maybe,
Now,
the Trump story. The Trump story.
With a file in it for Bannon.
Yeah. So did you think the sentence was fair, light, or did it matter just as long as he got some jail time and some fine at all?
It was the jail time that was important to me. The fine could have been up to $100,000. I thought
It could have been, and it was pretty light in that
Like
regard.
6,500.
You could barely buy a car for that,
Not
a used car.
You could barely fill up a car for that.
So I would say that the most interesting thing is he was charged with contempt of Congress, which when you put in a list, all of the things we suspect he has done is probably the mildest misdemeanor that you could imagine. And he's got 4 months in prison and he'll therefore serve probably 2, and he's probably already served some of that. And Trump is being subpoenaed to testify in front of a committee, which is hardly a very high bar. So I think triumphalism may be a little premature here.
and I was just thinking, though, in the big scheme of things, I mean, who doesn't have contempt for Congress these days?
Good point.
Well, we'll see in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, there'll be a whole new. Did you realize that every midterm, or I guess every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives is re-voted in or out?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that a
Been that
good
way for a
thing?
while.
Is that a good thing?
It's a great thing. I think the Constitution builds in a complete overthrow of the government every 2 years. What's wrong with that?
Well, except that it's only theoretical, because most of the seats are safe. Most of the seats are gerrymandered to be not contested at all, except during the primary. So it's a theoretical total overthrow every 2 years.
That's true. That's true. Unless somebody dies or leaves or what have you. But as far as gerrymandering is concerned, I'm skeptical about gerrymandering. I live in a very blue state, and it's very hard for a Republican to win anything in the state of Massachusetts. None of our districts are gerrymandered. It just happens to be the way the people roll. And I honestly, looking at Georgia in 2020 gives me a great deal of hope for the American experiment, because it's a deep red state, and they still managed to vote for 2 Democrats in the Senate, and they withstood a lot of pressure from Trump to fix the Electoral College. So I don't know. I have a lot of respect for them.
So you, in general, you have a lot of hope here. Can you kind of encapsulate that into some sort of rationale for why you are hopeful?
Me?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think at the end of the day, when you stop demonizing the other, and you understand that everybody's just like you, they, as Kennedy said at American University, we all have needs. We all have hopes for our children. It doesn't really matter what party you're in. Yeah, there are evil people out there like Donald Trump and Steve Bannon and that whole cabal. But we've gotten through 250 years without a major hiccup, and we've been through some pretty tough things. I think the Constitution that Mr. Adams and Mr. Madison wrote, Mr. Madison wrote, is holding up just fine. I don't like it all the time.
So why the panic about the end of democracy, if that's true?
Who's panicking?
Well, there's a lot of, CNN, MSNBC talk about that.
And do the people at CNN and MSNBC, and might as well say Fox, have a vested interest in the demise of democracy?
I don't know. That's a good question. What do you
No,
think?
but they do have a vested interest in panic.
Yeah. Actually, they wouldn't want the demise. They just want the panic. The demise would be going too far.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things to realize about news coverage, and news coverage on elections is about panic, and it's about horse race, and it's about worry. But one of the most reliable sources of advertising income in this season is political campaign ads and PAC ads, special interest ads. It's in the interest of people who sell advertising on news programs to keep a lot of churn and interest and panic and concern going, because it falls to the bottom line. And you can talk about what they used to call the Chinese wall between advertising and editorial. But at the end of the day, it's the publisher and the owners who make the rules, and they do very well. They're 2 big advertising surges in the U.S. One is Christmas, and the other is election season.
Yes, and they've done a good job at regularizing election season such that it's a permanent fixture.
But Snap doesn't seem to have been benefiting from this advertising. As we
And
see.
why do we care about Snap? Obviously the networks care about Snap not doing well, but what
do you mean Snap? What is Snap?
Snapchat, the
Snapchat.
original app, and they changed the name from Snapchat to Snap.
And the stock
Where
is
was
down.
I?
And the stock
stock is-
price snapped.
The stock is down 31% today to just over $7 a share. IPO'd, I think, in the 20s, and it's been much higher. And it's because they predicted that advertising is falling off a cliff for social media. And the reason we care is there's an underlying discussion as streaming moves to advertising, and TV advertising is fairly robust because it gets locked in ahead of time. But social media advertising is it seems the most vulnerable to short-term changes of decision to spend. And Snap and Facebook are both suffering from that, driven, of course, by Apple's changes which impact targeting on social media. So there is a reason to care, because the landscape of digital engagement is shifting before our eyes, and that means the whole business model of digital opens up to question.
Well, I think you can add a few other factors to that, and you hinted at that. One is that marketing dollars, advertising spend, is one of the cheapest variables in anybody who's trying to manage a department or corporate budget. If you lay off people, that's expensive and also painful. If you cut your ad spend, well, the people who suffer are at the ad agency and maybe at some of the companies that you used to advertise for. But it's a lot easier to swallow for yourself, for your own corporate financials and for your own corporate emotional well-being, to cut your advertising budget than to cut anything else.
And
Yeah.
you can actually cut your advertising, at least right now, and still switch the kind of advertising you do to find out eventually we may be able to be more successful without spending the kind of money we spent traditionally on traditional marketing. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, there was one vendor who will remain nameless, who completely cut out their Google advertising budget. And they didn't go back to it even as things got better, because they found out they were able to do some things differently and spend less money and still have the same, if not better, impact, and even have a better understanding of what works than they were before the pandemic, when they were just, giving money to Google because that's what they always did.
Well, ad impact is more trackable now than it ever was. There's, the famous John Wanamaker quote from, I don't know, the 30s or the 20s, where he said, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. I just can't figure out which half. And today you can track things, and people will always be adjusting and moving money here and money there and seeing how that impacts sales and engagement. Absolutely. So you've got a couple of factors. You've got the fact that the total ad budget is finite. The options for spending it keep growing and shifting. And if we're heading into a recession, the budget is not only finite, it's shrinking.
Right. The advertising budget is just another portfolio to be managed.
Yeah. And it's also almost turning in from just being an advertising budget to really being more of an engagement budget, because a lot of the things that people seem to be gravitating towards is not just people having ads forced on them. It's more creating these kind of engagement opportunities where, the person is kind of interacting not just with an ad, but actually with a community of folks who are interested in the same thing. And these dollars, I think, are kind of being transferred into trying to figure out ways to engage the audience and help the audience engage with each other around the product or service you're offering. And that's a kind of a pretty significant step away from the traditional marketing, where you just hope people are watching TV at the Super Bowl.
Give me an example of an entity that is moving toward this engagement thing.
Well, I think the one everybody has pointed to for years is the gaming industry. A lot of that is not just the game makers creating games and people playing it, but now it's been going on for years now. They give them the tools to actually kind of shape where the game goes. And then you have these communities of people in multi-user or multiplayer universe folks who are not just passively watching, or playing a game. They're playing with each other, or they're, finding ways to impact the game itself. And then, the gaming manufacturers are pretty smart to let these folks kind of go with it, because it keeps them fully engaged. And it's not just, you create a game, they buy the game, you hope they play the game. But now it's, they actually kind of co-create the game, and then they play in these massive communities. And that's a far cry from, the madman era, I guess, of advertising.
Well, that opens up another area of competition. It's not only among the various advertising platforms, but within a company, you have various departments competing with each other for the total marketing budget. So, depending on how large the company is, you may have one team managing advertising, one team managing social engagement, one team managing customer relations, and they are all competing for the marketing dollars within the company. So you remember how to succeed in business. Once you get to be vice president, you have it made, unless you're vice president of advertising.
But it is interesting that the advertising market seems to be very like the stock market, as in it's sentiment driven. If you look at why is advertising shrinking, it's because everyone is pessimistic about the next year or two, and they're assuming that they have to shrink their budgets. And it's all psychological. I mean, there's no actual, the economy, is not automatic. It's a function of what decisions people make. So if you persuade yourself to make the decision not to spend money, the economy will shrink. And if you persuade yourself to spend money, the economy will grow. So it's highly psychological, and people talk as if the economy is separate from humans, but actually it's the sum total of human decisions that are reflected in it. If you stop buying, the stock of company X, its share price will go down, and if you start buying it, its share price will go up. Today, if you take a long view, Snap is a bargain at $7 because it isn't going away. It is used by young people. It is still, worth billions of dollars. So it isn't as if it's become worthless, and it's got plenty of money in the bank. So I think a lot of it is about human psychology, where we persuade ourselves to be pessimistic, which probably spills over into politics as well.
Well, I think part of that psychology too is, what is the hot ticket today? There was a period when Second Life was booming, and every advertising agency was pitching all of their clients, you've got to get a Second Life store or platform or presence because it's a hot ticket. There was no revenue to be made from Second Life, but it was a hot item.
Weren't people buying islands and things like that?
Yeah.
The crazy
Yeah,
nonsense.
Larry Ellison bought an island.
Yeah, but that was actually in real life.
This is reminiscent of something that's all over Keith's newsletter, which is this fascination with AI art. Count me not a believer.
Actually, if you go and play with it, which is free, by the way, it's surprisingly interesting what it comes up with when you type stuff in. And even though I don't think it's really AI, I think that's a overused word, but it is clever use of existing material to produce new works. I saw one yesterday, which was, what was it? A robot sat on a bench wearing a police uniform or something that was typed in, and it gave a pretty good version of that. I almost used it for my newsletter. I tried typing in, because I wanted a robot and a human, but it produced rubbish for me because I probably wasn't asking it in the right way. So I ended up using a Creative Commons one. But I think the point in my newsletter is a bit broader, which came out of TechCrunch Disrupt, which happened this week. It finished yesterday, where Andreessen Horowitz and this guy from GraphQL had a discussion which kind of blew my mind. It's one of those penny drop moments when you're listening to someone, and at first I thought, this is completely rubbish. What are they talking about? It was called The End of Apps. And as I listened to it, it became more and more obvious they were right, that the center of gravity of our collective knowledge has moved to the cloud. As in the data, the content, the stored history, and the intelligence in the cloud to mine that data for meaning is growing rapidly. DALL-E and GPT-3 are just, mundane examples of that. There's much more examples which are much more actionable now. And that means that apps become required by data to present outcomes. And as that happens, the app really ceases to be, the point they made is a product manager who tries to figure out product market fit and designs an app and then builds it and then links it to data afterwards isn't going to be the future. The future is the data is going to suggest itself. There's going to be ways of querying it. And there may be apps that package it up that come out of the data. So there's no more product managers. There's now data analysts, data scientists, and question and answer style capabilities that transcend the smartphone and the app universe to become closer to that Star Trek experience of asking the computer a question and getting an answer pretty much immediately that you can trust. That seems to be the journey, and I recommend it's only 20 minutes long, and there is some hyperbole in it for sure, but I think directionally it's probably quite right.
Oh.
Here's some AI generated silence.
No, but that's an analog to something that's come up many times in our discussions when we talk about streaming and television. You just would like to be able to say into your microphone, "Get me this show," without having any interest in where it's from and who's streaming it and who produced it.
Basically, that's the reality. That's what's happening. I mean, there is no other way to find anything.
Well, we are definitely moving there, and you see the roots of it in Alexa and Siri and Google. Just ask and you shall receive.
Isn't that great?
It's going to take a while to get there.
So, Brent, are you being sarcastic?
No, I think it's great. Who wants to talk computerese? I mean, look how easy it is for us to just sit here and do this. If it was as easy to talk to applications as it is to talk to humans, we'd be doing a lot more through that stuff. I mean, I've been for years. I literally started a blog. Remember those things? Anyway, I started a blog on ZDNet called Voices Carry. And this is like 5-6 years ago, because I got really, excited and thought we were kind of on the cusp of actually being able to talk to our enterprise applications and not just ask Alexa to, turn the lights on. Because it felt like there's a lot of, it felt like there's a lot of momentum going that way. And then it didn't pan out. And all along, I was like, oh, it would be great. And if I was a salesperson, who they hate using CRM, but I bet it wouldn't be that odious a task if they were just able to talk to it like it was a human. And I think if we were able to get to that point where we can drop the computerese and writing for algorithm or talking or no, actually typing for algorithms and just speaking natural language to applications like we speak to each other, it'd be great. I'd love it.
But I don't think it's a point. I think it's a continuum. I mean, you can remember when you were using a search engine on the internet, you had to know something about Boolean expressions in order to get the results you wanted, with quotes and ands and ors and brackets. Now you just it's very close to natural language to do a search, and that's going to happen more and more. But although there's a speaking interface is fine, there are times when you want to have a visual interface. There is data that you would like to see graphically or in terms of words and charts. Yeah. So it's not as though one thing is going to totally push everything else out.
No,
video did not kill the radio star.
The best thing could be you speak to it and you get a visual back. I mean, and I think we're still probably far away from not just I give the application a command and it gives me something like an actual conversation where, you're going back and forth and you're getting to, to where there's enough meat there to get the end result without having to start over or, go to another rep and then have to repeat your name and address and phone number 5 times, but actually be able to just talk to your application in an actual conversation to get stuff done. I mean, and it could be visual responses or what, but that would be great. No, I'm serious because I don't know about you guys, but I hate having to type all the time. And yeah, I hate typing on these things. I'd much rather be able to speak meaningfully and not have to, learn a different language just to, to get something done out of the phone or out of the app. But we're not quite there yet.
So, I mean, I think the gap between what you can do today and what you soon will be able to do is a function of the middleware. So, like this week, I had to do a business dinner with a guest from Saudi Arabia who was staying in a hotel in San Francisco and didn't want alcohol or pork because he's a Muslim. And I used the iPhone to figure out all the restaurants around his hotel. And then I used Open Table to find an open table at a place that was suitable. And it was, maybe, I don't know, 20 steps in total, the whole thing. It's really easy to see now how that could be a single step. It's just, you almost need the penny to drop on what it is you're trying to do before you can use what's already there. And that was the key thing in this conversation. The point was made, everything's already there to do this. It's just no one yet figured out to do it. And so that's actually a tipping point moment. It's a bit like when Travis Kalanick did Uber, he didn't have to invent anything, or when they did Airbnb, they didn't have to invent anything. Everything was already there, just nobody really figured it out. And it feels a bit like that. And I think, for me at least, that is in contestation with the Web3 narrative, which talks about distributed apps.
Contestation, is that a word?
Well, it's in opposition to this whole narrative around Web3 and digital apps. It's possible that Web3 is more interesting in this context than in a distributed apps context, because which aligns with the fact that Dorsey this week announced that in the week that Musk made by Twitter, Blue Sky announced the first distributed Twitter protocol is now live. Blue Sky being the thing that Twitter funds to create a distributed version of Twitter. So when you start putting these things together, distributed, data in the cloud, no center when it comes to apps, but distributed protocols, if you like, and then intelligence, the next phase doesn't look anything like the last phase anymore, which is kind of amazing. That isn't to say what we're doing changes, because we're really using endpoint clients to publish into the cloud and get distributed. The pipes we get distributed on might change, and how we get distributed and where we get distributed might change, but not much else will change for us. But that underlying architecture is, and what it produces, it doesn't feel like the iPhone and apps anymore. It feels like the iPhone becomes even more important, actually, but not because of the App Store.
I think there's a lot to like in what you say, but I think you're jamming together two things that should be separate. One is applied R&D, and the other is basic R&D. And it's certainly possible that in my research, I've seen many times where a variety of innovations accumulate in society, and it's a practical matter of somebody taking them and putting them together and saying, here's something new. And there's a lot of what Brent was talking about and what you're talking about that fits that. But when you get to I don't know, other areas, it gets more sketchy. where if you want to just look at the metaverse, there's a great deal of we think we can do something with this, but we haven't done the basic work to get there yet.
Well, there's another dimension to this that I'd love to ask Keith about, which is the revenue flows. We understand what the business model is for investing in an app and marketing the app. Who in this world of no apps, who owns what, and how do people who use what's out there pay for it? Is it a micropayment situation? Is it a subscription to everything? How does the money flow?
That's part of the basic R&D.
Yeah, I struggle with, and I agree with you, Dennis. You got to separate. I think of RDP, research, development, and product, and it's only when it gets to P that I start to get interested. You can lose more money investing in R than any other way of investing, and you can lose quite a lot investing in D. But P, you still lose a lot of money, but you're going to win sometimes. But yeah, if Steve will allow me the indulgence, I experienced this through my own work, which is, so I've built what I think is an amazing data repository of funding rounds of startups going back to the 1990s, which is the same data, let's say, that Crunchbase or PitchBook or Dealroom or CB Insights have. But I've built a kind of a learning engine on top of it, which allows you to ask questions. So you can say, which companies that have done a Series A are most likely to become unicorns? And the probability of being able to answer that is super high because of the intelligence. And by the time you get to a Series B round, which companies should you invest in at Series B? I can reject 98% of companies and only pick 2%, and about 35% of those will become unicorns. So this data is super valuable. Everyone I talk to wants to buy the data, and I don't want to sell the data, because the most valuable thing to do with the data is attach money to it and invest. So I want to raise money on data that I have built and intelligence I have built. And in order to do that, we've used a no-code platform to build two apps, one for our investors and one for venture capital funds who are doing B rounds and C and A rounds. And we give those apps away for free, and they're no-code apps. I mean, a non-technical person in my team built them because they sit on top of the data, which is where the clever stuff is. And so my answer to your question, Michael, is I want the world to give me money to apply against my intelligence, almost like an investment that returns to them more money than they give me. They want to buy my data. And
but aren't you really, your data, it would seem to me, and please don't take this wrong, but it would seem to me that your data is useless and the power is in the applications.
well, the power is in putting money into the B rounds that qualify under my algorithms. That's where
So
the
it's
money.
the algorithms, but
The algorithms aren't the data, though. So
No,
you have a level of interpretation of the data.
Yeah.
That's the real value.
Yeah, so they don't want my source data. They want my output data.
Right.
Oh, okay, that's called information, though.
Yeah, they want my they want my information. They want me to sell subscription.
Right.
I'll never do that. I'll never do that, because that's the least valuable monetization strategy possible. And there aren't enough customers. The people who can deploy something like $6 billion a year is available. There aren't that many of them. So if you had a subscription to information business, you wouldn't be making much money. But if you have, give me your money and I'll give you it back 10 times over, you can make a lot of money. And so it's a quandary. What I'm really saying is, I think it's very specific to the use case, and I don't think there's yet a good answer in any use case. I think it's evolving.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, well, I guess I'm responsible for letting that go on. And now we're gonna await data as to whether anybody cares.
I
Oh,
found this discussion rather riveting. So
okay, excellent. So that's one. It sounded interesting to me right up to the point where I became responsible for letting it continue.
But do you think that they framed this as the end of apps, which I think is just a headline grabbing framing, because obviously apps are not going to go away anytime soon. But the grandiosity of an app versus this, it kind of shrinks an app down to a much smaller idea. In my head, that's what happened to me. So,
Well, if that's true, then apps really are on the way out. I mean, first you shrink it, then it goes away. I mean,
Well, I mean, it depends. It depends on what the app does. I mean, many of the things that I call apps now are doing some kind of query against data that's in the cloud, and the value of the app is how it does the query and how it presents the query. So it's a version of what Keith was talking about. How do I get my interest met? And that doesn't happen in the data itself. It happens in the way an app allows me to query the data and the way the same app will present the answers to me. So that doesn't go away.
Yeah, but then you get the problem of too many apps. You get the problem of the app you need being surrounded by millions, potentially other apps, and therefore, how do you find that app? So very quickly you get to the point of it's not the app, it's finding the app. And if it's finding the app, then the app is pretty much useless anymore.
So their insight is the app comes into being based on the question and then goes away immediately afterwards. So
I can see that.
So apps basically become dynamically created according to the need of the questioner or the goal in mind. So if you're searching image databases for some output, that's going to be a different app or user interface than if you're searching for B-round companies to invest in. But and they're all, and the cloud can support both and many other use cases. So they're really predicting the end of product managers building apps. They're not really predicting the end of apps. They're predicting apps no longer being the starting point for an idea, but being the end point of a need.
Well, I don't think that that takes into account the fact that people like stuff. I think people like apps.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's what it does and how it does it are less relevant than, you get the new baseball cards and then you've got some of them and they increase in value or they don't. And you spend a lot of time between this season and next season trying to figure out how it's going and whether you are enjoying yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see apps disappearing at all.
Yeah, I don't think it'll disappear either. It's just whether something else will exist that's more important than them.
Well, it may well already be true.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like we know what apps are. We know what apps do. We're used to apps. We just aren't thinking outside of the box. If you think outside of the apps box, there's all kinds of possibilities.
Yeah. A lot of these companies, this is a bit nichey, but there's all these data transformation companies, like there's one called DBT, GraphQL, the guy that was on this panel, this conversation, he's got a self-interest because he believes in something called GraphQL, which is self-organizing data, basically, with using metadata to understand how data A relates to data B. it's kind of interesting, but very geeky. DBT is different. It's like, okay, so you've got all this data in, let's say, a database in your company, and you want to put it in Google spreadsheets so that your analysts can look at very specific things, and it all gets automated. So when I look at the plumbing is, it's actually very good, but it's a little bit short of truly fluid data moving around for purpose. And this thing assumes that there really will be a single data lake with everything in it that's accessible. Snowflake, the company Snowflake, already has a data marketplace where people who use its platform can also sell access to the data on the platform. So things are beginning to get there, both in terms of using data across different platforms and in data becoming available either for free or for purchase. But I think it's not there yet.
One thing that kind of came up that was interesting, at least to me, besides the Rams this week, but I digress. In the Wall Street Journal, they had an article about Texas, the state of Texas suing Google over use of facial images. And I guess the state district attorney or whatever they call them, alleges that Google didn't obtain user content for biometric data use.
User permission?
Yeah, well, yeah, or consent for
Consent, okay.
for biometric data use. So all the stuff we do now to make it easy for us to use stuff like, you know, facial or retina scans or touch ID, they're actually not just using that to try to figure out who we are, but they're actually using that data for all sorts of purposes that it was never intended. I'm not just saying this for Google, but it feels like it's anybody who's using these newer biometrics to tell who we are, to give access or permission. They're not just using that data for access or permission. They're using that for all sorts of stuff. It'll be interesting to see how this goes, because if they're able to win this suit, if the state of Texas wins, what does that mean for, you know, all this data that's been flowing around and being collected, not for the intended purpose, but since they have it, oh, well, we've got it, so we might as well do something else with it now that we have it.
Yeah, it's a cascade of uses.
Google got sued in India this week as well, and in the EU. And as I kind of look at it, there's 100 different issues, depends which issues governments choose to focus on. It's pretty hard to be a global digital platform these days. I mean, and the fines can run into, you know, even in the billions. So there's something dysfunctional about the way in which we've got this technology canvas that overlays the world, and all these different regulatory regimes that have whatever interest they have different in different countries. I wouldn't want to really be running a global technology platform these days. It's super hard.
Think about it, Keith. You talk about the data you've collected for what you're doing, and people want access to it, right? That's why they want access to it. They want to be able to take it, do it, and use it in ways that you probably wouldn't even dream of.
Yeah.
And so all these, you think about, like, between the voice technology where you're asking Siri or Alexa, you know, to do stuff, so they're getting your voice. You know, if you log into your computer and it's a touch screen, they're getting your fingerprints. You know, it's almost like if you just open your eyes, there's a retina screen somewhere getting that.
Well, I think that's why Apple is so innovative, because the way Apple do it, and I assume this is true on Android, but I don't know that this is true, is your scan never leaves the device. So they don't have like a cloud store of your fingerprint or your face scan or anything. all they have is the ability on the device to say yes or no, this is you. And that's all built into the device. So there's no kind of centralized database of people, of biometrics for Apple. I think that's true of Google as well, although I'm speculating a bit there because I don't know for sure.
But it's just one step away from being that. And think of all the health devices. We're all running around with watches, and that's tracking stuff, and that's all this, health related data, and who knows what's going on with the financial services. If all they have to do is piece all this data together, like if somehow, Apple says, you know what, maybe we should use this, our retinal scan data, and that might tell us something about the person's eye health. And then we can rationalize using it for a number of other reasons that nobody else ever thought of when they were originally taking your retina scan. It's almost like a very deep rabbit hole that we're going down with all this stuff. And that's why I'm so curious to see how do the courts play a role in determining what these big tech platforms who are capturing all this data, where they have to say, oh, we can't use it. Or do we have to say every time that we come up with a new idea, we have to run it by the end users before we can actually use it? Or are we able to do a blanket statement? This is such a, like Keith said, it's such a complex area. I don't have answers for it, but I don't know if anybody can have an answer for all this stuff going on.
Those granular permissions you're talking about are stuff that nobody wants to bother with. Nobody wants to read all of the permissions in any kind of usage agreement.
That's true until it bites them in the ass somewhere.
That's right. Yeah, at some point it will bite you in the ass. Yeah. But people hire lawyers to go through documents that have lots of detail, fine print, permissions and restrictions. And most people, for most transactions, don't hire lawyers.
Well, I hate to be the one to say it, but historically, we at the end of a technology curve, there is regulation. There's government finally catching up, not in a bad way, but in a way that levels the playing field and takes some of the chaos out of whatever the technology sector happens to be. I mean, it happened in 1860s with setting the railroad gauge. Everybody thinks about that these days, right? But without
the railroad gauge. Yeah, I was talking about that the other. No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, without setting a standard gauge for the width of a carriage for a railroad, everybody could set their own, and you couldn't transship unless you unloaded one freight car and put it on another one. You couldn't just get on somebody else's tracks, and it was a great barrier to entry, and it was a great way to build the railroads to a degree. But then you started seeing all kinds of railroad companies competing with each other, running separate rail lines between the same two cities with different track gauges, and it was ruinously expensive, and a lot of people lost money. And railroads, you saw a great bell curve where first everybody wanted to get onto railroads, and it was going to be very successful, and then it started becoming very, very risky and expensive, and government had to step in to save railroads almost.
Didn't the same thing happen with regards to time? Wasn't time also standardized for railroads?
Precisely, yeah. For the obvious reason that you had to know what time noon was to catch a train, and so you had to have time zones.
It's a lot easier to do all of that in the context of a nation state, but once you start being global, things like the global time system are a good example of global cooperation. There's all kinds of other examples, lots of them, but none of them extend to social media there's no law, there's no real global law when it comes to digital stuff, really. So it ends up being lots and lots of patchwork national laws. So it's a minefield of
Yeah,
decisions.
but the implications of why Dennis brought this up are that this will be rationalized into some sort of standard.
Sure, it has to be. I mean, look. One of the great examples that you can have is the influence of NATO on the standardization of basic things like the howitzers. How big is a howitzer? How big is a shell that gets fired by a howitzer? Howitzers in the NATO group are all the same, have the same several different shell sizes, and the equipment that fires them is uniform across all of NATO, and that gives them tremendous power to defend the alliance. And it's also a sticking point when supplying Ukraine, because Ukraine had a bunch of Soviet era equipment and it didn't use the same ammo.
I would say maybe the difference from my perspective in those examples those are like, physical real world examples of stuff being made, and I think it's harder to regulate bits and bytes and digits because you might have regulation working on it for a month or so, but in a month or so, the technology might have made a change so that whatever you're working on regulation wise now is useless because the technology is changing so rapidly, and a lot of it is just completely virtual or digital. There's nothing you put your hands on. It makes it so much easier to move away from the current compared to the more physical, tangible things like the railroad. They couldn't just stop working the next day because something changed. In the physical world.
I think you're onto something important. When if you're dealing with something that has to do with a physical measurement, that's very discrete, and you can say the shell has to be so many millimeters wide, and the tracks have to be so many millimeters or inches apart. The things that we're trying to regulate now are not physical, but they have to do with social interaction, and they have to do with all kinds of vulnerabilities, and I think there's a lot of concern that the regulators will always be a few steps behind the innovators. And
maybe not. Has anybody here heard of the UCC or Uniform Commercial Code?
Yeah.
So the UCC is a great example of a distributed set of regulations that all 50 states have adopted, and it goes into how you define a contract, for example, what kinds of contracts need to be in writing, what ones can be verbal, and there's this standard setting body called the UCC that develops these things and hands them over to state legislatures, and the legislatures can vote them up or down, or they can negotiate changes, but the ultimate result is a very standardized set of regulation that has nothing to do with the federal government. It's what the individual states have taken on, and I believe there are UCC-like bodies on the international scene as well.
I have one more thing. Standards don't have to be global to be useful. Anyone who's traveled knows you need to take plug adapters with you and voltage transformers with you, because in one country or another, you can't plug your US equipment into the wall. It won't fit into the socket.
You can, but
or
you might not
blow
like
up.
the result.
So, but those standards are very useful within the countries. You wouldn't, so they're not global, but they're still widespread and they're still useful.
They're market-wide.
I'm kind of super interested by those times when change happens so fast that nations really are far behind. And I think of things like language translation. Some of the latest language translation stuff that allows real-time listening and translation, like real-time subtitles with a high degree of accuracy, prefigures a future in which it kind of doesn't matter what language you speak, and we all talk the same language. And money transfer is another one where it doesn't matter what denomination your wallet's in, you can spend in another denomination somewhere else without having to do a currency exchange first, because it all just happens on the network. There's so many things like that that are creating a single global set of experiences that you start to assume. I think NFTs, going onto trains, doing where your credit card just touches.
Yeah.
There's lots of things like that where nations, a little bit like apps, nations start to look super old-fashioned. And not only that, kind of insofar as they try to act like the past and regulate, they look like bureaucracies. It's more obvious in China and Russia, where
How about the EU?
and the EU, but they look like it's a bit less obvious here in the States because it's a slightly more liberal regulatory regime. But the same problems are there, which is nations are possibly an inappropriate vehicle. And it makes me think of ICANN in the domain name world, where the US voluntarily created a global institution to run the domain name system, which then had stakeholders, which included all governments. Starts to look a little bit more prescient than you thought it was at the time.
You know, Keith, I've often thought, and maybe you could comment on this. What would the EU look like today if Maastricht was signed last week instead of 30 years ago, for some of those reasons?
Maastricht.
The treaty.
Maastricht,
Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
the Maastricht Treaty was the treaty that that the EU started.
And the UK signed up for when it joined.
Oh yeah.
But you know, the way I think of it is the EU is a really good example of what I think of as top-down globalism, where a
Right.
set of bureaucracies try to create some supranational institution, and it's the opposite of bottoms-up globalism. You know, like where people start doing stuff, using stuff they've built that nations are barely aware of until they are. And I love bottoms-up globalism, but I'm not a big fan of top-down globalism because it, in a way, isn't real. It's just a bureaucracy seeking to preserve itself through getting bigger, usually.
It's a veneer.
Yeah, it's a veneer. So I'm not a big believer in socially engineered globalism, but I'm a huge believer in technology-led globalism, or you know, like travel, language capability.
Rock and roll and denim.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, there is something about language that you have to factor in, which is that people use it to communicate. They also use it to conceal. So you will have communities and generations who will modify the language in ways that allow them to not be overheard. So there's all kinds of slang and cant that comes out of generations, that comes out of ethnic communities, that comes out of professions, that keep the communication within some boundary. Even if it's overheard, it's not precisely understood.
Yeah, until you get the Beatles, 8-hour thing where they reached in with AI and unencrypted the conversations.
Well, I'm not talking about encrypting it by talking in a noisy.
But it's not being concealed.
No, it's concealed when you use when you give new meanings to words, and some small community understands what those words mean, but they mean the opposite in the larger community.
Okay, I'm not sure how that relates.
Well, you know, kid slang, black slang, carny slang, the slang that comes up in almost every profession, almost every community, almost any generation, things that kids say that they don't want their parents to understand. So they use new language, new words, you know, and eventually the secrets come out and translation guides are published. But then new forms of communication develop. I mean, it's part of the dynamics of language. People try to define a community by using language creatively.
That's
Daddy-o.
true, and an awful lot of that is directly related to keeping a breeding population coherent and unified. Even,
I don't know what that means. What did you just say?
well,
What population?
it's a generational thing. It's a generational thing where it is a way of saying, yes, I'm a member of this generation. I'm worth mating with. When I use particular slang or particular utterances that say I'm a member without having to say, here are my documents.
Ian
Rock and
Waring
roll.
Ian Waring in the Facebook chat wants to share with us that the width of a rail gauge is 2 Roman chariot horses' asses wide.
That is correct.
Wow.
Okay, now we're really getting down.
He actually said
Do it.
backsides, but Keith wanted to spice it up a little bit. So
That's true. That is true.
All right, so
Yeah.
we're starting
There's
to.
a good story in that as well.
Okay, go ahead, and then we're going to start getting to what else we haven't gotten to.
So the 2 horses. If you go back to 40 years to the Reagan administration, you remember the Challenger disaster. It happened because the solid rocket boosters had to be assembled in pieces, and they had O-rings that held the pieces together, and the O-rings happened to leak in cold, and that was the source of the explosion of the Challenger solid rocket boosters. Now, why were they made in sections? They were made in sections because they were made in Utah, and they had to get down out of the mountains by rail and across the country, and they had to get around corners, and they could only get around corners if they were a certain length, not bigger. So the engineering solution was we'll piece these things and we'll put an O-ring together, and more often than not it worked. On the particular day of launch, it failed, but here you had an example of late 20th century technology marvels being dictated by ancient Roman weights and measures.
And also dictated by politics. They had to, in order to get the funding for something as big as the Apollo project, put contracts in every important congressional district.
Absolutely.
So you couldn't just find one general contractor to build it. You had to give a little bit to Utah, and you had to give a little bit to Alabama, and you had to give a little bit to Texas, and all through the country.
Yeah. There are stories about things that were built at MIT that never left MIT.
So Keith, you have to verbalize the link. What was the purpose of the link in chat that nobody can see?
Oh, you were saying what else is there to talk about? So the link is a link to a foreign policy magazine's analysis of the Chinese leader's speech wrapping up the 20th Party Congress of the Communist Party in China, which was a fairly large scale, both domestic and foreign policy kind of overview of how China sees the world.
Okay, so let's have 3 of these, and then we'll decide which one to talk about. Anything else?
Not from me. Well, I do think the blue sky Twitter thing is kind of interesting, but it might be a bit too specific.
Hey, so
Is that the thing where he said he was going to lay off 75% of Twitter employees?
No, that's the black sky. That's black sky.
well, I was going to ask about that. So Musk says he gets in 75% of Twitter's going out the door. Is this just a negotiation play, and what is laying off or firing 75% of your staff look
Okay,
like?
so that's 2. A third one from Brent or somebody who hasn't weighed in.
Who's a good number?
nobody's talking about the Apple iPad. Everybody's mad at the latest release.
And because
I don't think it's really all that big a deal, and Apple is trying to milk people.
That's not why I'm concerned about it.
I thought the concern was mainly that, in order to create a range of products at different price points, different capabilities that don't cannibalize each other and don't cannibalize the MacBook line, they've got several product lines that work on different technologies, and try to advance each one separately makes them diverge in odd and apparently irrational ways, so that some of the lower priced iPads have features that are more advanced than the the higher priced iPads because of the fact that they're all working on separate technology tracks.
Okay, so those are the three topics. Vote. I don't know how stack ranking works, but
Let's not do that.
yeah, we'll do something else. But raise your hand for number one, China.
I would like to hear about China. I've got nothing to say about
Okay,
it.
so raise your hand. Okay, anybody else? So that's three for China. I'd also raise my hand for that. The
We
iPad.
can stop right now. Let's do China. What's the point of going first?
This is not a democracy.
We vote, but it's not a democracy.
Wait a minute,
It's a Republican democracy.
Does that mean if I say yes to something that all you guys say no to, we're going to do it?
Well, we'll find out. If you let,
But
if you let
this,
us
this
vote.
will bring us right back to the
I don't want
top
to
of
let
the
you
show.
guys.
Where Dennis talked about the collapse of democracy and whether that's an overblown.
That's
Doing
not
voter
number-
suppression
that's not
right
one of
now.
the
I'm not
three.
going to allow you guys to vote.
Oh, so you're gonna
This is the new America here.
filibuster.
Vote block.
Nobody's voting.
Filibuster. Okay, I recognize not state of Georgia for a minute. So there's raise your hand for, what was the second one?
Twitter.
Yeah,
Twitter
Twitter.
and Musk.
Raise your hand.
I'm going to vote for 2.
Oh, that's fine. All right, so 1, 2.
Do I negate Keith and Michael if
No,
I
it doesn't count.
Oh, you want to vote twice?
Yeah, no, you can
He
vote
wants a
vote
negative
twice.
vote.
I
He wants
understand
a
what he
negative
wants,
vote to
but
count the positive vote.
the gauge of the steel
Okay,
does
let's get
not
on with the vote.
reflect it.
Yes,
Okay,
put
and
it in
then
the mail, see if we count it.
number 3 is the iPad thing.
I also vote for that. I ordered one, so I've got opinions.
Okay,
on
so that's
Oh,
3.
he's already. I should
And
have.
I would also add to that. So that's 4,
Okay.
just to, cheat.
So what does that leave us? I mean,
That-
Well,
So
let's start talking about one of them. We don't have all day.
that's
yeah.
correct. All right, so the votes say either the iPad or China.
And
Aren't they
Steve
made in
Gillmor,
China? So
Steve
maybe we can
Gillmor
combine.
says,
No, I was part of that vote.
no, I know, but you just said it isn't
Yeah,
democracy.
but we need a tiebreaker, Tina. What should we talk about?
Let's go with China.
I shouldn't have asked you.
Okay, I may cut the China discussion short in order to get some of the iPad stuff in.
Then let's do the iPad first. Let's go.
I
iPad.
will note that
This is
nobody
no way to run a
cared
democracy.
about-
by the way.
Hey, it beats nothing.
It's the best we got otherwise.
That's right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hmm.
And Ian Waring, I think, would probably agree. All right. So China, what do you want to say, Keith?
I think it's quite a watershed moment because Xi Jinping basically gave a speech addressing a global audience, which normally Chinese leaders don't do. And in it, he expressed a few things. Firstly, economic optimism that China is going to become equal in GDP terms with the US in the next phase, not just in compared to living standards, but absolute GDP. Then secondly, he said that China has the ambition to be a player on the world stage through economics mainly, and to be engaged with the global community, so not isolationist. And then thirdly, he said that China does consider Taiwan part of China and will use any means necessary to make that so, which could be interpreted as a very kind of military framed kind of statement. But it basically was saying, look, don't tell us what to do in our own backyard. We'll decide, and we think Taiwan is ours, which was if you just look at it dispassionately, and aside from what you think about that, it was a strong statement of optimism about the ability to dictate the scope of its future by China. And China normally is a defensive nationalist country who's most afraid about getting cut off. The tone of this was not aggressive, actually, but certainly outward looking, global, not defensive, and confident and optimistic.
Did he say anything about the chip, NVIDIA, TMS stuff?
Yeah, he acknowledged all the challenges of this is aligned with China's normal stance of being the victim of international decisions, which is the self-perception of a Chinese politician is that they're the victim of international decisions and need to do things to chart their own path because they can't trust their partners. That's like the defensive nationalism I referred to. And in the chip area, he reinforced that. He basically acknowledged that it was a threat. He acknowledged it was a challenge, but then he presented it as, because it's a challenge, that China will rise up to it and end up being an independent semiconductor manufacturer. And the Taiwan thing, by the way, plays into that because a lot of the world's production is in Taiwan.
So one of the arguments against the Biden moves in terms of isolating military related chip production is that it would tend to drive China toward their own solution. I'm not sure I agree with that, simply because if that was the case, that's going to happen anyway, and we don't really see a lot of data to suggest that they're going to be able to overcome some of the market forces that are in play.
The Sinosism Substack shone a lot of light on that. Mm-hmm. So as we probably all know from marketing stuff coming out, the current state of the art in semiconductor production is 7 nanometer capability. China is still at 80 or 90 nanometer capability, so is many, many generations behind when it comes to the production. They can make semiconductors. They don't have the production equipment or the design equipment to do it competitively. So there's no fear that they won't be able to build semiconductors. They just won't be able to build competitive semiconductors for the world market.
Okay, so anybody else have any?
Well,
by the way, the one other citation, which is the stratechery or whatever it's pronounced, stratechery is what it should be, according to the George W. Bush methodology.
You'll never fool him again, by the way.
Exactly. Or his father, who still doesn't know what a gallon of milk costs. But Ben Thompson is very deep in this issue. As a matter of fact, that's how I came to discover the Sinosism newsletter, is because they're in frequent touch. So he's, if you care about this issue, you should be subscribing to that newsletter.
It's very hard for a Western brain to pass this, but looked at from their point of view, it's like the Berlin Wall. They think of Taiwan as having been artificially separated from a piece of their country, in the same way that Germany thought they were artificially separated from a piece of their country. And obviously, politics gets in the way of being able to see those two as equivalents, but certainly from their point of view, they do see that as equivalent.
But I don't see this particularly as a political issue. I think it's a strategic issue. And so far, Biden has been quite successful with his agenda when he reduces it to an economic discussion. So I would think that the lack of belligerence on the part of Xi in this area is significant, as I think Dennis has made the point over and over again, and you have too, Keith. China does not want to lose the U.S. market.
Well, and America shouldn't want to lose the Chinese market. They should be interdependent, actually.
And I believe they are to a large extent. So it's a fascinating what do you call it, co-opetition. It is in one sense opposed and in another sense intertwined, and it's very hard to pull it off. I wonder how much of what Xi's speech said this year is radically different or just an acceleration and continuance of what was going on before. It's not as though China was isolated prior to this year. They had the Belt and Road Initiative. They have tremendous investments and presence in Africa, and they are well integrated into the global economy. I think what may be changing is increased militance and military investment, and I think that's where the Taiwan threat comes in, because when he says by any means necessary, there's an implied threat of an invasion.
Last thought there, Dennis.
I think we need to look at the other side of the coin. We can talk about China's pluses and Xi Jinping's optimism, but I think the Chinese situation, the Chinese setup, is never going to may rival the rest of the world, but it's never going to achieve dominance. It's not going to achieve dominance because it is a top-down approach to a variety of things, and it's been demonstrated over and over again that a bottom-up strategy, which is basically the strategy that was applied by Great Britain and later by the United States in achieving global dominion. I think those demonstrations suggest that as long as China's a one-party state, as long as laws are fungible, flexible, as long as they manipulate their currency, they're always going to be striving but not achieving.
He echoed a lot of that, by the way, Dennis. It's quite interesting.
I haven't read the article, but yeah, okay, good.
He talked about the need for legal basis for more.
Now I want to cut this short
sorry.
because I want to get to the iPad discussion. Whoever brought it up, what do you have to say?
Michael, that was you, wasn't it?
No, I just no, I chimed in.
There are 4 votes for,
But I think it was in fact, and I didn't vote for it.
So you're the least.
No, I just chimed in to say to give my point of view of what the controversy is.
whoever brought it up. So
I think it was Keith who brought it up
already without having action.
I voted for it though. Well, I'll tell you, I ordered one. Why did I order one? Just because of the M2 chip, basically. That was the only reason I ordered it. I don't care about the camera upgrade.
And how is that going to impact on your work or personal life?
It means that it's got upgraded screen sharing. So now I've got a Mac screen. If I plug it in to the Mac screen, it can drive the screen at the full resolution, and you can get 2 screens really easily. DaVinci Resolve coming on it is a big deal.
What does that mean?
DaVinci Resolve is like Final Cut Pro, but it's for professional grade cameras like the one that Brent's got. So Brent, maybe you can talk about that, because I think being able to deal with the files that come out of those Blackmagic cameras and have a fully featured video editing app on an iPad with dual screen, it kind of starts to be, it doesn't compete with a Mac laptop because in many ways it'll be better than Mac laptop at doing certain things because of the touchscreen.
Yeah, and it'll shoot, I think it'll shoot 4K
ProRes, yeah.
video. It still doesn't have the same as good a quality camera as the iPhone, I think 13 and up. But yeah, no, I think that's the big. I hear a lot of people saying it's not, they're kind of, pulling the wool over our eyes with the Pro. People seem to be more excited about the lower entry iPad, because there are some design changes. Apparently, you're able to use the camera in landscape mode instead of portrait mode or something like that. So
Yeah, they moved the camera to the other side instead of it being on the narrow side. It's on the wide side.
Yeah, but they didn't do that on the iPad Pro, so people are like kind of.
Well,
but
I mean, that's part of why there's some controversy, because they've made some advances at the low end that aren't on the high end yet. They made some advances on the high end, which you'd expect not to be on the low end.
Right. But I think Keith is right. Once the one app that I'm interested in, of course, is the DaVinci for iPad, DaVinci Resolve for iPad. But I think as more higher end apps develop specifically for the M2 for the iPad, they could roll out. You'll probably see more and more people finding it interesting. But it's
as I understand it, the top Pro apps that Apple has for the Mac for video editing and music aren't available for the iPad.
No, I don't think Final Cut is.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it's also it's kick charged a what is the name of it? LumaFusion, for example, is a really interesting platform which allows you to be able to use the Mac for writing and the iPad for content development. And as the newsletter space broadens to include both audio and video, as well as writing, that's a significant move. One other point I would be interested in, I think it's a little bit future, is YouTube TV has announced the ability at the API level, and perhaps it'll be a knockoff feature on the 4K version of the product, the ability to have four screens, four different channels. I think that's going to drive a lot of sales.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll sneak in a little Musk nothing just to wind this down. Anybody wanted to talk about what about Musk? I was interested that he is one of the two co-founders of OpenAI.
Why?
The guy has a habit of putting humans on Mars.
In cars.
Yeah.
So the question was, he's threatening to lay off 75% of the Twitter staff or Twitter employees. What does that look like? 75% sounds like, everybody.
It sounds like he's going to make a different company completely.
Well, I think it's pretty clear he wants to make a different company. People are alarmed at the 75%, not simply because of all the people are going to lose their jobs, but what happens to moderation on Twitter? What happens if Trump comes back? What happens with the fact that Musk seems to be echoing the Putin line of, all right, let's stop funding Ukraine and tell them to just give up on Crimea. and negotiate now.
Well, I'm
So-
not particularly interested in the, in the analogies between Russian politics. I'm more interested in the question of one of the things that happened with prior to Musk's offer or, foray into Twitter was that Twitter was already talking about layoffs of not 75%, but maybe 25%. Or restructuring of the workforce.
Okay, well, that would be
So-
something reasonable, but usually when someone is looking to buy a company, they're looking to kind of keep the fear down and make this like a gentle transition. This sounds like I'm gonna get in there, I'm gonna, change everything, everything's gonna be different, just wait and see. And it's a little bit, I don't know, frightening.
Well, I would think it's reasonable to assume that Musk's ambitions for Twitter will result in a platform that's pretty much unrecognizable as Twitter today. He's interested in going in new directions.
I think he's
using it as a
going.
foundation.
I'd agree with you there, but we can already see the outlines of it in what Substack is doing. So I think he's doing he's competing against the future Substack, or whoever acquires Substack.
If I was in that position, I think the 75% layoffs has to be put in the context of what Twitter does and how many employees it has and what they're mainly doing. It's pretty hard to just deal with the number unless you ask, well, how does it break down? I remember at Real Names, I had a moderation team that was 30% of staff because Microsoft made me sell keywords only to the rightful owner, and I had to, look at everything. And it was a massive cost center. Now, because Trump doesn't believe in moderation, he literally
Trump?
Sorry, Musk. Musk doesn't believe in moderation. He believes that Twitter should be the subject to the law, but aside from that, shouldn't be self-regulating internally. That it's T's and C's basically.
I'm not sure that that's what his position is. That's certainly not what he stated it as. What he stated it as is that he doesn't think that Trump should have been kicked off the platform.
Yeah, but he's also not talking about, protecting people who are on the platform, about the kind of trolling that's going on. He's talking about bots and stuff, sure, but he's not talking about protection, which I think we've been needing, wanting, clamoring for, getting little. And I just don't see that.
I mean, does he recognize that harassment is an issue that needs to be addressed at all?
I think so. That's
What he says, or what he has said publicly, is, from what I have seen, he says as long as it's legal.
Yeah, you said that.
Yeah,
that's right.
Right.
And
So
well, I
by the
think
way,
harassment's legal.
it
is legal.
If harassment is legal,
it is.
Then
Then he's looking to rebuild a worse cesspool.
No, that's not true.
okay, Grant has to leave, so I'm going to call a halt to this.
We'll pick it up the next time.
I would just say, unless you consider humanity a cesspool, because he wants it to be more like the real world.
Okay. Once around the table, as we wind down, starting with Dennis.
I'm cautiously optimistic that the polling might be wrong, and the Dems might do okay in the upcoming midterms. That's all I'll say. I can't say that I don't think they're going to lose seats.
Tina.
Happy to see that Kanye West is losing some of his sponsorship with and I think that bodes for if companies start to ditch him, I don't know. I think that there's a little bit of an election kind of comparison here, but I'm glad to see that there's some action being taken.
Michael,
Well, I share Dennis's hope that the polling is wrong. I think there's some reason to believe that the polling is wrong, but I don't completely share his optimism that that democracy is not under very serious threats.
Keith.
I am speechless for the first time for a long time. So I'm
Oh.
Excellent. That gives Brent the last word. Brent.
Well, I will then attribute Keith to my starting to think I'll probably end up getting the new iPad Pro.
The big one, the new Pro.
The big one. The one, because I can see DaVinci Resolve on my iPad wanting to do stuff on that. So thanks, Keith. Spending my money.
I bought the little one, by the way, because they're exactly the same except for the screen.
Oh, we knew that. I mean, you always buy the new one.
But I got the little new one, not the
Oh, you
big
got the
one.
11-inch one?
Ah.
Yeah, because I read on it in bed, and the 12-inch one's too heavy to read. Your arms get tired very quickly.
I might do
All
that.
right. Thank you all. Thanks to everybody who
Thanks.
showed up.
And thanks to the audience.
Thanks
Yeah.
the audience. Yeah.
The audience, the
Okay.
live audience, and
The rhythm of
also
it doesn't work. I mean, of course, thanks to the audience.
Sorry,
And thanks to Frank, wherever he is.
hit me with your.
Well, he's
stick.
in SCAD, preparing for his massive, whatever the name of that movie is,
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner music
40th anniversary celebration.
Yeah, it's
All right. Well,
next year will be 41st.
we'll be happy to welcome Frank back
We get there.
in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Thanks to everybody who showed up, and especially those who didn't. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.